The desert sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty town of Red Mesa, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1887. At the edge of town, where civilization gave way to endless plains of sage and sand, a tattered canvas tent flapped in the hot wind. This was home to 12-year-old Tommy McAllister, an orphan who had known nothing but hardship since his parents died of fever 2 years prior. Tommy wasn't like the other street children who begged for coins or stole from merchant carts. He worked, hard and honest, doing odd jobs that most folks considered beneath him. He cleaned stables, hauled water from the creek, and swept the wooden boardwalks outside the saloons. For his labor, he earned barely enough to buy stale bread and occasionally, if he was lucky, a piece of jerky. But Tommy had one treasure, one companion who made his difficult life bearable, a gray donkey named Pepper. Pepper was small, stubborn, and had a crooked ear from some long-ago mishap. But to Tommy, she was perfect. He'd found her abandoned near the old mission 3 months back, near death from dehydration. Tommy had shared his precious water rations with her, nursed her back to health, and in return, Pepper became his loyal friend and working partner. With Pepper's help, Tommy could haul larger loads and take on better-paying jobs. She carried firewood, pulled a small cart for the general store, and sometimes gave rides to children for a penny each. Together, they were a team, surviving against the odds in a harsh and unforgiving land. It was late afternoon when Tommy noticed a figure stumbling along the desert road. At first, he thought it might be a drunk cowboy from one of the nearby ranches, but as the figure drew closer, Tommy realized this was something different entirely. The man was Apache. That much was clear from his clothing and long black hair. He wore traditional buckskin leggings and a torn shirt, and he moved with the unmistakable gait of someone pushed far beyond exhaustion. His feet dragged in the dust, and even from a distance, Tommy could see he was in bad shape. Most folks in Red Mesa feared and distrusted the Apache. The wars might have been officially over, but memories were long and bitter on both sides. Tommy had heard the stories, raids, battles, kidnappings, but he'd also heard his mother's voice in his memory, telling him that every person deserved kindness, no matter who they were. Tommy approached cautiously, carrying his water canteen. "Mister, you all right?" The Apache man looked up, and Tommy saw eyes filled with pain and fever. He was young, maybe 25, and clearly sick. When he tried to speak, his voice came out as a harsh whisper in a language Tommy didn't understand, followed by broken English. "Water, please." Without hesitation, Tommy offered his canteen. The man drank deeply, some of the water spilling down his chin. As Tommy got closer, he saw the infected wound on the man's leg, wrapped in crude bandages that had long since failed their purpose. "You need a doctor," Tommy said, though he knew the town doctor wouldn't treat an Apache, and even if he would, Tommy had no money to pay him. The Apache man shook his head weakly. "Home, must reach home, family." He gestured vaguely toward the mountains in the distance, at least 30 miles away across brutal desert terrain. Tommy looked at the man, then at Pepper, then back at the man. His mind raced through the implications. If he helped this Apache, the townspeople might turn against him completely. If he gave up Pepper, even temporarily, he'd lose his only means of earning a living. But if he did nothing, this man would almost certainly die out here in the desert. His mother's words echoed again. "Character is what you do when nobody's watching, Tommy. It's what you do when it costs you something." Tommy made his decision. "Pepper can carry you," he said, leading his donkey over. "She's strong, and she knows the desert. She'll get you home." The Apache man's eyes widened in disbelief. "You give." "I'm lending her to you," Tommy said, though he wondered if he'd ever see Pepper again. "Can you ride?" With Tommy's help, the Apache man mounted Pepper. The donkey, sensing the urgency, stood patient and still. Tommy tied his water canteen to the saddle and added the small bundle of food he'd been saving, some dried beef and hardtack biscuits. "Follow the North Star tonight," Tommy instructed, pointing toward the mountains. "Pepper's smart. Give her her head, and she'll find water. When you reach your people, if you can't, send her back to me." The Apache man looked down at Tommy with an expression the boy couldn't quite read. Surprise, respect, gratitude, all mixed together. He placed his hand over his heart and said something in Apache, then added in English, "I am Nate, grandson of Cochise. I will not forget this. You have honor, young one." With that, Pepper began walking toward the mountains, carrying her precious cargo into the gathering dusk. Tommy watched until they disappeared from sight, then walked slowly back to his empty tent, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. That night was the loneliest Tommy had ever known. Without Pepper's soft breathing nearby, the tent felt enormous and empty. He lay awake, staring at the canvas ceiling, wondering if the Apache man would make it home, wondering if Pepper would find enough water, wondering how he'd survive without his only friend and working partner. By dawn, Tommy's worry had transformed into resignation. He'd done what he thought was right, and now he'd have to live with the consequences. He splashed water on his face from the creek and headed into town to look for whatever work he could find without Pepper's help. The day was long and hard. Without the donkey, Tommy could only take the smallest jobs, sweeping, running messages, polishing boots. By sunset, he'd earned only 15 cents, not even enough for a proper meal. He bought a few hardtack biscuits and returned to his tent, trying not to think about the future. Tommy woke to voices, many voices. Confused and alarmed, he scrambled out of his bedroll and peered through the tent flap. What he saw made him think he was still dreaming. Outside his humble tent stood a line of men, not just a few, but dozens of them. Cowboys in dust-covered clothes and worn hats, ranch hands with sun-weathered faces. And at the front of the line stood something even more surprising. 5 Apache warriors in traditional dress, and beside them, Pepper, looking well-fed and content, with a beautiful new saddle on her back. Tommy stumbled outside, speechless. The lead Apache warrior stepped forward, an older man with gray streaking his long hair and in bearing of unmistakable authority. "You are the boy who saved Nate?" he asked in careful English. Tommy nodded, unable to find his voice. "I am Chatto, chief of our band. Nate is my nephew, grandson of the great Cochise. He was lost for 3 days, wounded, dying. Without your help, without your gift of this fine animal, he would not have survived. You gave your most valuable possession to save a stranger, an Apache, when your own people would have let him die." The old chief placed his hand on Tommy's shoulder. "This is true honor, true courage. The Apache do not forget such debts. We have brought your donkey back, and more, we have told your story to others. These men have come to help you." Tommy looked at the line of cowboys and ranch hands, many of whom were gruff men he'd seen around town, but who had never given him a second glance. Now they stood with their hats in their hands, looking almost embarrassed. A weathered cowboy named Jake Harrison stepped forward. "Kid, I heard what you did. That took guts, real guts. I need help at my ranch, and I'm offering you a job. $3 a week, meals included, and a place in the bunkhouse. You and your donkey both." Before Tommy could respond, another man spoke up. "I'll offer $4 a week and teach you horse training." $5 and you can bring that donkey to live in my barn, finest barn in the county," called another. One by one, the cowboys and ranch owners made their offers. Some offered jobs, others offered money, supplies, or training in valuable skills. The banker, Mr. Thornton, who had previously ignored Tommy's existence, stepped forward to announce he'd opened a savings account in Tommy's name with the starting balance of $50, donated by townspeople who'd heard the story. Mrs. Chun, who owned the general store, brought a basket of food. "For immediate needs," she said with a warm smile. "And you have credit at my store now. Good credit." The schoolteacher, Miss Patterson, approached shyly. "Tommy, I'd like you to attend school. Free of charge. Education is important, and you've proven you have character worth developing." Tommy stood in the center of this whirlwind of generosity, overwhelmed to the point of tears. His simple act of kindness, done with no expectation of reward, had somehow transformed his entire world. As the cowboys began to disperse, still debating among themselves who would get to hire Tommy, Chief Chatto raised his hand for silence. "There is one more thing," he said. "The Apache have also brought gifts." The warriors brought forward several items: beautifully crafted leather goods, a warm blanket woven in traditional patterns, and a small pouch of silver coins. But the greatest gift was yet to come. You gave without expecting return. Chatto said, "This is the Apache way also. From this day, you are under the protection of our people. Any Apache you meet will know your name and will call you friend. This is not a small thing. And more, Nature wishes to teach you the ways of the desert, how to track, how to survive, how to understand the land. These skills will serve you all your life." Tommy finally found his voice, though it came out choked with emotion. I didn't do it for reward. I just couldn't let him die out there." "We know," Chatto said, and for the first time he smiled. "That is exactly why we honor you. You saw not an Apache or a white man, but a human being who needed help. This is wisdom that many never learn." That evening, after all the visitors had left and Tommy sat with Pepper outside his tent, soon to be abandoned for a real bed in a real bunkhouse, he reflected on the incredible turn his life had taken. He'd accepted Jake Harrison's offer, not because it was the highest paying, but because he'd seen kindness in the old cowboy's eyes. He'd start work in 2 days, after moving his few possessions to the ranch. Miss Patterson had enrolled him in school, which would meet 3 days a week, so he could still work. And Chief Chatto had invited him to visit the Apache settlement once a month to learn traditional skills. As Tommy brushed Pepper's coat, now shining and healthy, he thought about his mother's words about character. He'd done the right thing without knowing if anyone would ever know, without expecting anything in return. And somehow, that had mattered. The ripples of one small act of kindness had spread farther than he could have imagined. "You know what, Pepper?" he whispered to his faithful donkey. "Ma was right. Doing the right thing doesn't always pay off right away, and maybe it doesn't always pay off at all. But when it does, it pays off bigger than you could ever dream." Pepper snorted softly, nuzzling his shoulder, as if she'd known all along. The story of the homeless boy and his donkey spread throughout Arizona territory. It was told in saloons and around campfires, in churches and schools. Over time, it became a legend, sometimes embellished, sometimes simplified, but always carrying the same essential truth, that character, compassion, and courage could change the world, one act of kindness at a time. Tommy McAllister grew up to become a successful rancher and a bridge between the white settlers and the Apache people. He never forgot the lesson learned that day in the desert, that we are all connected, that kindness multiplies, and that the measure of a person lies not in what they have, but in what they're willing to give when it matters most. And Pepper, she lived to the ripe old age of 32, beloved by all who knew her, a small gray donkey who had carried more than just one man to safety. She'd carried a message of hope across the divide of fear and prejudice. Some say that on quiet desert nights, you can still hear the soft clip-clop of her hooves, reminding us that no act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever truly wasted.